Thank you all for being patient. We have a lot to learn in this new normal. We have a lot to discover about ourselves. We have a lot of ways that we have to rise up and to reach up and to become people we might not have imagined we could. I hope in the comments, if there's anybody, and I can't see them now, but I will look later. If there are folks who are feeling like they need an extra special reaching out to, or they don't have enough food in their house, or they need something in particular, let us know. We will try and figure these things out together. We can't guarantee anything magical. We have no magic wand. I hate to disappoint you. And I have no magic in my toolbox, but I do know one thing. We are a congregation that knows about surviving a plague. And we know the power of compassion and of support and of joy. And we will reach deep into those places as we recreate ourselves every single day, figuring out anew what inventions we must create, what we have to manage, what tools we need to make it through a day whole and not crushed by things. In this week's Parsha, we end the book of Exodus with a double Parsha, actually. And with these two Parshiot and last week's, we have almost, I would call, a mind-numbing amount of detail about the building of the Mishkan. The Mishkan is often translated into English as tabernacle. I don't like that translation so much because the word Mishkan itself as a Hebrew word has a lot of power. The root of the word Mishkan is same as the root for Shekhinah, the female form of God's presence in the world. It's the same word as the word for neighbor in Hebrew. It's the same word that we use when we talk about God's presence, neighbor, or connectedness. And there's a feature in biblical Hebrew called, for those of you who are biblical Hebrew geeks, the locative mem. Locative meaning location. In a lot of Hebrew words, when you place the mem and create a noun out of a shoresh, it creates a location word. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, although I do love that stuff. But so the word Mishkan is an example of that. It's taking the root for God's presence, as in not in gifts, but presence, and the word for presence in general, and the word for neighbor. Putting a mem in front and creating a noun creates the word that then gets translated as tabernacle, which just doesn't do it for me. And maybe Harold or other Greek experts in the congregation can tell us the root of the word tabernacle. I'm sure that would be very interesting. I don't know it myself. But the Mishkan, in other words, is a location. By creating this locative noun, it's the location in which God's presence dwells, or God becomes our neighbor. Now, there's a very interesting connection in all of these chapters that start way back last week and go through to the end of this week of the building of the Mishkan, where there are two big themes that we find in all of these chapters. One is the building of the Mishkan, how wide it has to be, how tall it has to be, what are the materials for the sides, what are the materials for the top, what do we use for the decorative elements of it. I'm telling you, unless you're an architect, and I know we have some among us, or an interior designer, or somebody who loves math, it is a bit mind-numbing. And so go ahead, enjoy it if that's your thing. It's not mine, but I love the concept of the amount of details that it takes to create something holy. So a piece of what the Parsha is telling us is it's not an easy thing to create a Mishkan, a place in which God dwells. It doesn't happen because you snap your fingers. And I'm afraid that American culture has made us very soft in many ways, that I don't think our European relatives or ancestors would have the expectations many of us did about how things should be easier than they are. Life is full of suffering. Life is hard. The question is, how will we deal with it? Not to be surprised when life is full of suffering, and not to be feel that we're entitled to something else, but to be prepared to deal with that. And it starts with the Mishkan. So what does it mean to create a space in which God will dwell? Well, the first thing is it's hard work. It doesn't happen automatically. Wow, that's intense. It's not automatic that God just exists. No, it actually takes developing the muscles and creating the space. And in the time of the desert and our people wandering from Egypt, all those 40 years and building something, there were a lot of details, because part of the message of these parshiot is that it takes hard work to create anything that's meaningful, profound, or sublime. It doesn't happen with the snap of anything. And we know that about talent itself, whether it's piano or painting. Just because somebody has a lot of talent as a painter or a pianist, if they don't put thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of practice and hard work into it, the talent, unfortunately, will just not be enough. And so when thinking about God's presence in the world, think about it a lot like talent. It's there all the time. Imagine it's just there, but the question is to access it, to really develop the muscles to create the space in which God can dwell. In other words, God's holiness will really be felt. It takes work. So the first thing is the Israelites build this Mishkan with mind-numbing detail. And by the way, a lot of people have taken that detail and tried to recreate it in life. And those who are architects, don't yell at me that I'm touching my face. I know it's very anxiety producing that everybody's watching me. Okay, I'm tying my hands over here. Don't touch your face. I see you out there touching your face. Okay, back to the drash. So the second big theme of these parshiot, besides the building of the Mishkan, is what? And if Naomi Springer-Galst is listening in, she actually laned a piece of this last Shabbat for her becoming an adult. And it's also featured in these parshiot this week. The two things that are dominant in this whole section of the building of the Mishkan is the building of the Mishkan, and then the commandment or the exhortation by God that we must observe Shabbat. So we have these two things, the Mishkan and Shabbat, that are emphasized in this entire section. Some people say there are 6 units, which indicate the parallel that the building of the Mishkan is made up of 6 units, like the 6 days of the week. And then Shabbat is there to teach us that after we do all that hard work, we, like God, have to rest. And the Gemara goes even farther to make a profound connection between the building of the Mishkan and Shabbat by saying the same word malacha, which is translated as work, is used for the building of the Mishkan as God's prohibition for what we're not supposed to do on Shabbat. God doesn't say we shouldn't do avodah, another word for work. God says we shouldn't do this thing called malacha, for another word, a Hebrew word for work. So the rabbis ask, what's the connection between malacha of Shabbos that we're not supposed to do and the malachot that built the Mishkan? So the rabbi said, since the word's the same, guess what? The 39 malachot that were used to build the Mishkan are the 39 categories of work we are not allowed to engage in on Shabbat. So to this day, when a traditional Jew does not do certain things on Shabbat, every single thing that is not done in Shabbat is related to an aspect of building the Mishkan from all of these parshiot that we're about to end with the reading tomorrow. So in some ways, it's a curious thing. So even today, Shabbat is about building the Mishkan. We do not on Shabbat, we do not do the work that's related in building Shabbat. We don't hammer, we don't create, and we don't sew. Every element of the 39 forbidden things on Shabbat are from the 39 categories of what it took in this week's Parsha, in the mind-numbing detail, to build the Mishkan. Many people obviously talk about this and analyze it and think about it, and I want to offer one way. There are many, 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 many. So I know people will say, well, what about this? What about that? I know. Put it in the comments. Yo, I'll take care of you. Yo, take care of everybody. So Abraham Joshua Heschel wrote a profound book called The Sabbath. It's a skinny little book. I don't have one in my home library. It's in the CBST library, which I'm not sure when I will see that library again. It's a very thin book. And in that book, he said the difference between and what we learn from the building of the Mishkan, and we learn from its connection to Shabbat, that what the Mishkan is building holiness in space, that we're creating something physical, not because God needs it. God is everywhere. God is everywhere. The Baal Shem Tov says, the Besh says, that we know that God exists because it says that God exists everywhere. So if we don't stop and remark on how beautiful something is, we're not acknowledging God's presence. Similar to what Alice Walker says in her famous chapter in The Color Purple, that if you pass by a field of purple flowers and you don't take a moment to stop, see them really for what they are, acknowledge them, Alice Walker says, that really pisses God off. So Heschel and Alice Walker are saying the same thing. And the Baal Shem Tov are saying the same thing, that God is everywhere, and it's our job. It is our job as human beings created in the image of God to make sure we don't rush by those fields of beauty because we're too busy feeling sorry for ourselves, or we're too busy trying to accomplish something in the world, that we don't stop and pause and see the beauty in God's universe. So Abraham Joshua Heschel said, the building of the Mishkan is about building holiness in space. We're creating something because we human beings exist in space. We're not ephemeral angels. We are physical, we have flesh and blood, and we're limited in that way, in a way that God is ineffable and without limit. God is like the word infinity. Can you really understand the word infinity? You can start imagining what infinity means, but can you really understand what an infinity means? I had an astronomy professor once who said that it took years of graduate school in astronomy before he was able to begin to even think about the concept of infinity. It took work. It took practice. It takes exercise. Likewise, to really deeply appreciate what God is, what holiness is, what something sacred is, takes time, takes work, takes developing those muscles. And you start by expressing gratitude, by noticing the purple flowers. So Abraham Joshua Heschel said there are two primary ways that we can access God's presence, or Mishkan, meaning the place where God resides. In the Chumash, we also recently read that the famous verse, which became the verse of our entire capital campaign for CBST's new home, Asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham. Make for me a mikdash. Again, for those of you who are grammar geeks, there's another locative mem. Mikdash, a holy place. Kedusha, a place, a location in which Kedusha exists. Vasuli mikdash, make for me a holy place. V'shachanti b'tocham. And then I, God is speaking, v'shachanti, the same root as Mishkan. In other words, to dwell, to live, to be a neighbor, to surround, to be a presence. You create holiness, God says, and then I will dwell b'tocham, among you, not in it, meaning the Mishkan. The grammar could have been very different. God could have said, build me this tabernacle, and then I will live in the tabernacle. No, of course not. The Asuli Mikdash, create holiness, God says to us. The Shachanti B'tocham, and then I will dwell, I will live, my presence will be known among you. So in other words, if you do the hard work, the mind-numbing detail to create physical expressions of holiness, then I will be with you. If you don't take the effort to make it in the first place, you're not going to experience God's holy presence. And then Heschel's Chiddush, or Heschel's innovation, or his new way of thinking about this, said, just as the Mishkan was a place in which God's presence would exist if we built it in space, in other words, is that two-dimensional or three-dimensional? I guess that's three-dimensional, right? I was never very good at all those. Yes, Randy's telling me that's three-dimensional. And let me just say something to all the parents out there who have to homeschool their kids in math. Oh my God. I'm very proud of you, because it'd be really embarrassing for me how little I could teach a second grader. Anyway, back to Heschel. Heschel I'm comfortable with. So in his book, The Sabbath, Heschel said, as the Mishkan was creating holiness in space, three-dimensional space, Shabbat is creating holiness in time. So just as we build the Mishkan in the desert in the time of our exile to create a place to remind ourselves of God's presence so that God will be with us always and everywhere. Melo chol haaretz kavodo. That's what the Besh says. Because of the verse, Melo chol haaretz kavodo, it says God's presence is everywhere. So it doesn't mean that the Mishkan is the only place where God's presence will be. But Heschel says, so that we don't do the 39 malachot, the 39 acts of building the Mishkan on Shabbat. We are creating a Mishkan in time, not in space, but in time. And so as Heschel said, that what Shabbat provides us is an opportunity to create, I don't want to use the word castle because it's not a castle, of course, it's a Mishkan, to create a holy space in which God's presence will dwell. That's the point of creating a Mishkan in these Parshiot and now in Shabbat. Over and over and over again, the Gemara emphasizes this connection between building of the Mishkan and Shabbat because they are interwoven throughout these Parshiot. So we end this Parsha with the building of the Mishkan and the creation of Shabbat. So I pray that every week that we find ways, especially as the world continues to deteriorate around us, to remember that God calls on us to do the work to create holiness. It can be done by any person at any moment. Shabbat is a time to stop doing the physical creation in the world, the three-dimensional stuff, so that we recreate ourselves, we refresh, we renourish, we renew, and that God's presence is once again renewed in us so that when Shabbat ends tomorrow night, we can go out and face the next 6 days. But we can also face the 6 days knowing that Shabbat will come. We will have community, we will have God's presence. I'm so deeply moved by all of you who have volunteered to help congregants, to help others, to be there on the phone or in all different kinds of ways. And we know that in this creation of God's presence in our lives, we have power. Our power is to partner with the Holy One. Our power is to make every opportunity in our universe full of holiness. Everything can be full of holiness, and it can also be empty of holiness. The choice is ours. God's absence can be terrifying. But with the power of love and light and of community, we can continually refill and renew the time in which we have on this earth with light and with love and with God's presence. I pray for each of you to feel that, to know that you have that power to create love, that you have that power to recreate light, that you have that power to create God's presence in this world. And to remember over and over again these words of Heschel. If we want to measure what degree we should be good in the world, we should look at the degree evil the fascists exhibit in their lives. And it is to that degree good we must be. Remember, no one can do everything, everyone can do something. Be the reason people believe in the goodness of human beings. And don't despair. Do not despair. Do not despair. Let the feelings carry the feelings with you. We will be facing very difficult days and weeks ahead. These next 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks in New York City, we will see each day grimmer and grimmer, I'm afraid. But if we are the powers in the universe which bring God's presence even to those bleak moments, we will be building a foundation for the future which will look back on us and be grateful we did not give in and we did not give up. And I'm proud and deeply moved to be in this work and in this life with all of you. And let us continue building these castles, building these times, building a Shabbos of God's presence. Shabbat Shalom.